A young nurse got fired after saving the life of a U.S. Marine. 24 hours later, she received a shocking presidential invitation. That evening in the city hospital in New York, Emily, a 26-year-old nurse, never imagined her routine ER shift would turn her life upside down. The ER wasn't just busy, it was drowning. 2 trauma cases had arrived just moments before she'd come in. It was just past midnight. The emergency room was briefly calm, like the moment between 2 crashing waves. Then suddenly, slam. The double doors burst open with a deafening thud. Cold air and rain rushed into the ER like a ghost, trailing behind 2 paramedics drenched from head to toe. On their stretcher lay a young man, bloodied, broken, barely breathing. "We've got a code red," one of the paramedics barked. Mid-20s male. No ID, unresponsive, extensive chest trauma, possible shrapnel wounds. Vitals dropping fast. All eyes turned. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward. Her gaze swept over the patient, his face swollen and unrecognizable beneath a mask of blood and dirt. His uniform, or what was left of it, was torn and soaked. Combat boots hung loosely from his feet. But it was the glint of metal on his chest that held her attention, a dog tag, twisted and smeared with grime, engraved with a simple line, L. Jackson, U.S. Marine. A chill ran down her spine. "He's military," someone whispered behind her. "Where's the ID?" another asked. "None," the paramedic answered. "Found him alone. No comms, no phone. Looks like he was dumped near the docks." The room froze. Nurses exchanged glances. Even the head supervisor hesitated. "We don't have clearance," she said cautiously. "He might be federal. We wait for authorization." Emily blinked in disbelief. Wait? The man on the stretcher was barely clinging to life. His pulse was weak, breath shallow, skin already paling. "He's crashing," one of the techs called out. Emily didn't wait. She stepped forward. "Prep the trauma bay. I need a suture kit, oxygen, and plasma stat," she commanded. Her voice sliced through the uncertainty in the room like a scalpel. The supervisor raised a hand. "Emily, you're not cleared. He'll be dead in 10 minutes, Emily snapped back. "We don't have time." There was a moment of hesitation. Then, as if her urgency was contagious, the team kicked into motion. Gurney wheels screeched against the tile as they rushed the Marine into Trauma Room 3. Emily followed, gloves already on, adrenaline surging in her veins. Inside, the room lit up in chaos. Emily grabbed gauze and began cleaning the blood from the man's torso. Beneath the mess, jagged pieces of metal protruded from his ribcage, embedded deep into the muscle. Blood pulsed from the wounds with every weak heartbeat. She clenched her jaw. Vitals. BP 70/40 and dropping fast. Pulse ox. 81 and falling. Emily barely heard the numbers. Her mind tunneled in. The world outside the trauma bay faded into a blur. There was only her and him. Scalpel. Clamp. Suction. Each command rolled from her mouth with the precision of a general leading troops. Her hands moved fast, but steady. She pulled out one shard of shrapnel after another, fingers slick with blood, sweat dripping down her temple. The heart monitor beeped erratically. Time felt elastic. Every second stretched painfully long, yet everything happened in a blur. She caught herself whispering under her breath, "Stay with me. Come on, stay with me." At one point, his breathing flatlined. For a split second, the world stood still. But Emily didn't stop. She compressed his chest again and again, counting out loud. She refused to give up. Not after coming this far. Not when his life was still flickering behind closed eyes. Charged the paddles to 200. Clear. The shock rippled through his body. Nothing. Again. 250. Clear. The Marine's body arched. The line on the monitor wobbled, then beeped. A soft, stubborn, precious beep. "He's back," the tech whispered. Emily let out a shaky breath but didn't stop. She stitched the largest tear in his chest muscle, inserted a drainage tube to relieve internal bleeding, and stabilize the collapsed lung. Her hands, soaked and sore, never lost rhythm. 3.5 hours later, the worst was over. The room was quiet now. The team stood back, exhausted, speechless. Blood bags hung nearly empty beside the bed. Emily stepped back, peeled off her gloves, and stared down at the man who had nearly slipped through her fingers. His eyes fluttered. Emily froze. He looked up, barely, and locked eyes with her for a brief, fragile second. His lips moved, though no sound came out. She leaned closer. "Thank you." That whisper, more breath than voice, cut straight through her. Relief hit her like a wave. Her knees threatened to give out, but she steadied herself. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to exhale. He was alive. She had done it. The Marine would live. But outside those doors, the world was waiting. Policies, protocols, consequences. Emily had crossed a line, and she knew it. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with gray as morning broke over New York City. The ER was quieter now. The chaos of the night had simmered into an eerie stillness. Birds chirped faintly outside, but inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights continued their steady hum. Emily stood near the recovery wing, her fingers wrapped tightly around a styrofoam coffee cup she'd refilled 3 times without drinking a drop. Her scrubs were wrinkled and stained, her bun loose and fraying at the edges. But she didn't care. Across the room, through the small glass window of Trauma Room 3, she watched the Marine sleeping, his chest gently rising and falling. He was alive. That simple fact brought a swell of quiet triumph to her chest. Despite the impossible odds, despite the protocols she had shattered, she had saved him. She had made a choice, and it had mattered. A voice over the intercom summoned her to the administrator's office. Her brows furrowed, the moment's warmth vanishing. She had expected some pushback, maybe a meeting, a formal review. But the voice sounded final, cold. She made her way down the sterile corridor, passing nurses who looked away too quickly, doctors who nodded without meeting her eyes. The door to the office stood open. Inside sat 2 people, Chief Administrator Helen Dryden and Dr. Warren, the hospital's legal counsel. Emily stepped in, her hands clasped in front of her. "You asked to see me?" Dryden didn't smile. "Sit." Emily obeyed, nerves crawling up her spine. "What you did last night," Helen began, "was commendable in intent, but wholly inappropriate." Emily blinked. "Inappropriate. You acted without federal clearance. You took charge of a classified patient with no authority, no briefing, and no support from senior staff. Do you understand the legal risk you put this institution in?" Emily sat back, stunned. He was dying. Dr. Warren cleared his throat. "Ms. Reed, this hospital has protocols. If we had known he was military, there are channels. What you did, while emotionally understandable, was a violation." "Emotionally understandable," she echoed, barely able to contain her rising voice. "You think this was about emotion? I followed my training. I made a call based on a life-or-death situation because no one else would." Helen glanced at the clock. "You're an excellent nurse, Emily. But rules exist for a reason." And then it came, the word she didn't expect so soon. "You're being terminated. Effective immediately." Time slowed. Emily's mind went blank. All she could hear was the steady tick of the wall clock behind Helen's head. Tick, tick, tick. "I saved him," she said softly. "I saved a man's life. And we appreciate that," Dr. Warren replied, without emotion. "But this decision is final." The meeting ended without ceremony. No escort. No applause. No second chances. Emily walked back to her locker in a fog. Her badge hung limp from her fingers. Her name tag, Emily Reed, RN, mocked her silently from the plastic. She emptied her locker, placing her stethoscope and a small packet of mints into her tote bag. Around her, the staff said nothing. A few looked guilty. One nurse gave her a sad smile, but no one spoke. By the time she stepped outside, the air was thick and still. No rain, no wind, just silence. She stood on the curb for a long moment, staring up at the massive building. The hospital where she had given her nights, her patience, her youth, now just bricks and windows. A place that discarded her the moment she acted on her conscience. "All I did was save a life," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. And with that, she turned and walked away. The sun had barely crested over the rooftops when the first SUV appeared. At first, no one noticed. In Emily Reed's modest neighborhood in Queens, early mornings usually meant newspaper deliveries, sleepy dogs being walked on leashes, and neighbors sipping coffee on porches. But when the second black SUV turned the corner, and then a third and fourth, curtains began to twitch. Children pressed their faces to windows. A jogger slowed to a walk. By the time the 10th SUV rolled to a silent stop in front of Emily's building, the street had gone unnaturally still. Upstairs, Emily was nursing a headache and a mug of lukewarm coffee. Her apartment, small, cozy, and cluttered with nurse textbooks and framed photos of her late father. still carried the heavy quiet of yesterday's storm. She hadn't turned on the news. She hadn't even opened her curtains. She had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, sleep refusing to come. In her lap sat the dog tag. L. Jackson, U.S. Marine. She had kept it after the chaos, clinging to it like an anchor in the emotional whirlwind that followed. It wasn't hers to keep, but something about it felt unfinished. A reminder of the man she saved. The reason she was fired. The reason she both hated and cherished the past 24 hours. A sharp knock broke the silence. Not a neighborly tap. Not a casual delivery. A purposeful knock. Commanding. Final. Emily jumped. She placed the mug on the table and padded barefoot to the door. Through the peephole, all she could see was black. Black suit, black tie, dark sunglasses, and a deadpan expression. Flanking him were two other suited men, arms clasped in front of them, earpieces visible, shoes polished to a blinding shine. She hesitated. Was this a prank? Police? She opened the door a cautious inch. Miss Emily Reed? The man in the center asked. Even his voice felt formal, rehearsed, restrained. Yes, she croaked, still in her faded gray pajama pants and a wrinkled T-shirt with a faded bluebird on it. I'm Agent Porter with the United States Secret Service. You're requested at the White House. Immediately. Emily blinked. I'm sorry. What? You're requested at the White House, he repeated, this time slower. The president would like to speak with you. About what? There was a pause. Agent Porter tilted his head slightly, a rehearsed nod of apology. I'm not at liberty to say. Behind him, one of the other agents pressed his finger to his earpiece, then gave a slight nod to his colleague. Emily leaned against the doorframe, trying to gather her thoughts. Wait, are you sure you've got the right person? He didn't blink. Yes, ma'am. It's urgent. We'll escort you now. I'm not even dressed, she stammered. You'll have time to change in the vehicle. Emily's mind was a storm of confusion. She had just lost her job. Her life had turned upside down. And now, the president? She looked down at the dog tag still clenched in her hand. Her heart thudded in her chest. She grabbed her clutch bag and dropped it inside, then rushed into the bedroom. 2 minutes later, she returned in jeans, a clean white blouse, and a hastily tied ponytail. Her hands were trembling, but she tried not to let it show. The agent stepped aside as she locked her apartment behind her. The neighbors were already out now, some pretending to water their lawns, others blatantly watching from behind car windshields or open windows. One little girl waved at Emily, wide-eyed. Emily gave her a small, confused smile before being ushered into the SUV. Inside, the seats were leather, the smell sharp and new. The windows were tinted so dark she couldn't even tell which way they were driving. A bottle of water sat in the cup holder, untouched. The agent in the front seat glanced back. We'll arrive within the hour. Emily nodded mutely. Her eyes scanned the scenery as they sped through Queens, then into Manhattan. No sirens, no flashing lights, just silent priority. Her mind raced through every possibility. Why would the White House want to see me? What if I did something wrong? Was the Marine someone important? Then a darker thought struck her. Was I in danger? Her fingers instinctively curled around the dog tag. The metal felt cold and strangely heavy now, as if it knew more than she did. She closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. The SUVs merged onto the highway. They weaved effortlessly through traffic, drivers pulling over without hesitation. Somewhere above them, she thought she saw a military helicopter cutting across the sky. 30 minutes into the ride, she spoke. You said the president wants to see me? Agent Porter gave a brief nod. Yes, ma'am. Why? Again, silence. Only the hum of the engine. Emily let out a frustrated breath. Look, I was fired yesterday. If this is some kind of, it's not disciplinary, he interrupted. You're not in trouble. That should have comforted her, but it didn't. Not when every inch of her life felt upended. She had been trying to do the right thing. She had saved someone's life. And instead of praise, she was handed a pink slip and left to figure out what came next. The convoy exited the highway and entered the federal zone. Security cameras tracked their every move. Police checkpoints parted with practiced efficiency. One by one, the SUVs rolled past iron gates and guards until the White House loomed into view, majestic and intimidating against the morning light. Emily's mouth went dry. She had seen it in textbooks, on news broadcasts, in movies. But this was different. It was real, alive, towering. The vehicle rolled to a gentle stop. Emily could hear the sound of her footsteps echoing through the grand corridors of the White House. The click of her shoes on the marble floor felt too loud, too real, in a place so drenched in history. Framed oil paintings watched her silently from the walls, portraits of men who had shaped nations with decisions made in these very halls. A curator's voice drifted faintly from a nearby tour group, reciting facts about the architecture, but Emily wasn't listening. She was being escorted by two staffers, both polite and unreadable. The silence between them felt sacred, like they all knew something monumental was about to happen. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Inside it, she still carried the Marine's dog tag. L. Jackson, U.S. Marine. Somehow, she hadn't let go of it since that night. She couldn't. It was more than metal. It was a tether to something bigger than her. To the moment everything changed. They stopped in front of a set of tall double doors. One of the aides looked at her and said softly, "He's waiting for you." The doors opened. And there he stood, the President of the United States. He was taller than he looked on television. Thinner too. His suit was sharp, but his posture was slightly weary. A man with the weight of the world balanced carefully on his shoulders. He stood near the resolute desk, the historic symbol of power, his hands clasped behind his back. As Emily stepped in, he turned. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice low, steady. "Thank you for coming." Emily froze just past the threshold, unsure whether to bow, curtsy, salute, or just faint. She swallowed. "Thank you, Mr. President." He smiled faintly and gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, sit." She obeyed, carefully lowering herself into the leather armchair. Her hands clenched together in her lap, knuckles white. Her heart beat against her ribs like a caged bird. He didn't sit. He paced slowly for a moment, then stopped and looked directly at her. "You saved my son," he said. The words hung in the air like thunder. I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know who he was." He nodded. "That's what makes what you did even more remarkable." He paused. "When protocol failed, when bureaucracy hesitated, you stepped up. You saw a dying man, and you acted. Without approval. Without hesitation. And because of that, because of you, my son is alive." Emily's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "I've read the report. Watched the surveillance. Listened to your colleagues. Some froze. Some said you overstepped. But all I saw was courage." The door opened again. The First Lady entered. Elegant, poised, and deeply emotional. The moment their eyes met, Emily stood instinctively. The First Lady crossed the room in seconds and pulled her into a gentle, unexpected embrace. "You didn't just save a soldier," she whispered into Emily's ear. "You gave us back our child." Emily's vision blurred. Tears welled unbidden in her eyes, and for the first time since the chaos of that night, she let them fall. Not in frustration, not in exhaustion, but in overwhelming release. When the First Lady pulled away, her own eyes shimmered with gratitude. "We had been preparing for the worst," she said. "We were told his unit was ambushed, that he was likely dead. When we got the call that he was alive, critical, but alive, none of us could believe it. And then we saw you, on the footage, fighting for him when others hesitated, holding him together when hope was slipping." Emily looked down, unable to find the words. The President stepped forward again. "We've brought you here today not just to thank you, but to honor you." Suddenly, a knock at the door signaled the entrance of several members of the press. Cameras clicked quietly as they filed into the room. A military aide entered last, holding a small, velvet box. Emily turned instinctively toward the President, confused. He nodded once to a nearby aide, who unfurled a document on a wooden easel bearing the presidential seal. The President cleared his throat. "For acts of extraordinary bravery," he began, reading from the prepared statement. "For placing service and humanity above all else in a moment where lives hung in the balance. And for saving a United States Marine under critical circumstances, it is my distinct honor to award the Medal of Honor to Nurse Emily Reed." The cameras exploded in a flurry of clicks. Emily's mouth opened slightly in shock. I don't deserve that," she whispered, dazed. "Yes," the First Lady said firmly, stepping beside her. "You do." The President gently lifted the medal from its case. The blue ribbon shimmered under the lights, the golden star glinting like fire. "Stand tall, Emily," he said. "This isn't just a medal. It's America saying, 'We see you.'" Her knees felt like jelly, but she rose. He stepped forward and placed the medal around her neck. The weight of it made her breath hitch. The cameras captured every second. The nurse who saved a son, honored in the seat of the nation's power. But it didn't stop there. As the applause in the room began to quiet, the president lifted a hand. "One more thing," he said. "This administration believes in investing in those who show rare character. As of today, Nurse Emily Reed has been appointed head nurse of the White House Medical Unit." The press erupted again. Emily staggered back slightly. Sir, I'm not even employed right now." "You are now," he said with a smile. She stared at them both, overwhelmed. "And," the First Lady added, "you'll be provided housing near the campus, with full clearance, full salary, and your choice of staff. You deserve more than a thank you. You deserve a life of purpose, not punishment." The military aide approached her again, this time with a small folder. Inside was the official White House appointment, already signed. "Do you accept?" the president asked. Emily couldn't speak for a moment. She glanced down at the dog tag in her hand, L. Jackson, then up again. I don't even know what to say." "Then don't say anything," the First Lady said gently. "Just breathe it in. You've earned this." And for the first time in days, Emily felt her shoulders release. The weight of doubt, of shame, of questioning her worth lifted. Gone. This wasn't a dream. She wasn't being punished anymore. She was being seen. Sunlight spilled across the manicured lawn like gold paint as cameras flashed and reporters huddled behind velvet ropes. The crowd murmured with anticipation, the American flag billowing proudly in the soft spring breeze. News helicopters hovered distantly overhead, and dozens of media outlets had gathered to witness what would soon become one of the most heartwarming national stories of the year. Emily Reed stood at the center of it all. She wore a navy blue dress, modest but elegant, and her hair, neatly curled, brushed against her shoulders. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, but inside, her nerves fluttered like trapped birds. She had been through so much in the span of just a few days: fired, found, honored. And now this. A stage had been set up in front of a beautiful, two-story colonial home in Arlington, just a short drive from Washington, D.C. The house was cream-colored with hunter green shutters, a wraparound porch, and white columns that gleamed in the sunlight. The kind of house you dream of, but never imagine owning. The president stepped forward to the podium. Applause rippled through the crowd as he adjusted the mic and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "when we think of American heroes, we often think of those who wear uniforms: military, police, firemen. But heroes come in all forms. Some wear scrubs. Some walk the hospital halls late at night. And some, like Nurse Emily Reed, don't wait for orders. They act on instinct, compassion, and unwavering courage." The crowd cheered. Cameras clicked. "Today, we recognize not just her bravery," he continued, "but the spirit of service she embodies. And in that spirit, it is my honor to present Emily Reed with the keys to her new home." A staffer stepped forward, holding a small, polished wooden box. Inside, resting on velvet, lay a single golden key. Emily stared at it, stunned. The president turned to her. "This is more than a house, Emily. It's a symbol of appreciation, of trust, of beginning again." The applause swelled again as Emily stepped forward. The moment her fingers closed around the key, her eyes filled with tears. Reporters leaned forward, throwing out questions in rapid succession. How does it feel to go from fired to nationally honored? What was going through your mind that night in the ER? Did you ever imagine something like this could happen? Emily raised a hand gently, and the crowd settled. She stepped up to the podium, took a slow breath, and spoke. I'm overwhelmed, humbled. I didn't do what I did for recognition. I did what any nurse would do, what we're trained to do. I saw a man dying and I acted. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed help. That's the job." Her voice trembled, but she stood tall. "I lost my job that night. But I gained something I never expected: clarity, purpose. And now, standing here, I realize that sometimes losing everything opens the door to what you were meant for." There was a pause, then thunderous applause. The media loved her sincerity, her humility, her poise. Social media exploded with hashtags. #NurseHero, #EmilyReed, #FromFiredToForever, and clips of her speech went viral in less than an hour. But just as the ceremony seemed to wind down, the president raised his hand once more. "One final announcement," he said, "because courage deserves not just reward, but responsibility. Today, I am officially appointing Emily Reed as the new head nurse of the White House Medical Clinic." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily froze. I thought that was symbolic," she whispered to the First Lady beside her. "No," the First Lady replied, smiling. "It's very real." The President continued. "We want someone brave, decisive, compassionate, someone who leads with their heart and puts people first. Emily Reed is all those things and more." Emily's knees nearly buckled. From being cast aside by her hospital to standing under the seal of the United States, this was beyond redemption, it was rebirth. Later that afternoon, after the ceremony had ended and the press had cleared out, Emily walked slowly through her new home. It was quiet now. Sunlight danced across the hardwood floors. The kitchen smelled faintly of lavender and new paint. Upstairs, she peeked into 3 spacious bedrooms, each with wide windows and soft cream walls. A small library sat at the end of the hall, its shelves already lined with classic novels and medical texts. She stopped in the doorway of what would be her bedroom and leaned against the frame. Tears spilled freely now, tears she had held in for too long. She thought of that night, the blood, the beeping machines, the fear, the silence of the morning after. And then she thought of now. Her fingers brushed against the dog tag in her pocket. She was no longer the nurse who had been fired. She was no longer invisible. Weeks later, the White House Medical Clinic, the halls of the White House were nothing like the hospital. They were quiet, solemn, and steeped in formality. And yet, Emily moved through them with growing ease. Her ID badge now read, Emily Reed, RN, Director of Medical Services. Her uniform bore the White House insignia, and her clinic sat just 2 doors down from the Vice President's suite. It wasn't just about treating colds and checking vitals. Her days were filled with high-stakes tasks, overseeing emergency protocols, preparing for dignitary visits, briefing Secret Service medics, even consulting on evacuation drills. She treated senators, advisors, foreign diplomats, and once, the president himself after a minor fall. Each time, she held her composure. Each time, she proved her place. But her favorite patient, the one who reminded her why she was there, visited quietly one morning. Leon Jackson, the Marine. He stood in her office doorway, fully recovered, wearing his dress blues. "Permission to enter?" he asked with a crooked smile. Emily blinked, stunned, then nodded quickly. "Of course." He walked in slowly, his limp barely noticeable now. He stood straight, proud, and offered a crisp salute. "I never got to thank you properly," he said. "You did," she replied softly. "That night, in the trauma bay. I wasn't sure I imagined that." "No," she said, smiling. "You didn't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. She unfolded it carefully and gasped. It was a medal, the Navy and Marine Corps medal. "For heroism, not involving actual conflict," he said. "They gave it to me, but I told them. I wouldn't be here to accept it if not for you. So it's yours, even if unofficially." Emily stared at the medal, then at him. "You're alive. That's all the thanks I need." He nodded, and they sat in silence for a moment. "I never got to ask," he said finally. "Why'd you do it?" Emily thought for a long moment. "Because I couldn't not." And that was the truth. It wasn't about medals or jobs or fame. It never had been. It was about a decision made in the blink of an eye. A choice to act, to save, to serve. Now, she walked halls lined with portraits of presidents. She was trusted by leaders, sought after by advisors, and honored by a nation. But more than anything, she was back where she belonged, helping others. Redemption, respect, responsibility. All hers now. The headlines still carried her name. Her face, once anonymous among hospital staff, was now featured in every major outlet across the country. From late-night interviews to online tributes, Emily Reed had become a symbol of quiet heroism, of moral courage in a system tangled in red tape. But not everyone was celebrating her rise. Behind closed doors and in quiet corners of old hospital corridors, the whispers began. They started small, disguised as curiosity, masked in professionalism. "She got lucky," one nurse murmured while restocking supplies. "If that Marine hadn't been the president's son, we wouldn't even know her name." "I heard it was all staged," another added during a coffee break, rolling her eyes. "Cameras were already waiting. Doesn't that sound suspicious to you?" "Protocols matter," a doctor snapped during rounds. "You don't break rules and then get promoted to the White House." The whispers grew louder. Some of her former colleagues barely acknowledged her in public now. Online forums buzzed with threads dissecting her story, doubting her intentions, downplaying her sacrifice. Underneath all the praise, a thin river of resentment quietly flowed. Emily saw the comments. She didn't go looking for them, but they always found her. At first, she told herself it didn't matter. She had done what was right. She had saved a man's life, and she had never acted for recognition. But even with all the medals, all the honor, something inside her ached. It wasn't pride, it was pain. The pain of being misunderstood by those she once stood shoulder to shoulder with. The ache of realizing that her courage had cost her not just a job, but friendships, trust, and the sense of belonging she once had in the ER. Still, she held her head high. She went about her duties in the White House medical clinic with the same quiet discipline she'd always known. She treated senators, aides, foreign dignitaries. She worked late, smiled often, and responded to emergencies with steady hands and a calm voice. She earned every inch of the respect she was now given, but deep inside, she missed something she couldn't name. One evening, after a long shift and a quiet dinner alone, she found herself behind the wheel of her car, driving with no destination in mind. The city lights blurred around her, headlights carving out silence in the night. Almost without thinking, she turned down a familiar road and parked across from her old hospital. It looked exactly the same, its facade bathed in artificial light, the ambulance bay bustling with action, staff walking briskly in and out of the emergency doors. She sat for a long time, engine off, windows rolled up, watching. She didn't know why she was here. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, deep down, she just missed who she used to be before everything changed. After a few minutes, she stepped out and zipped her hoodie all the way up, pulling the hood low over her face. She crossed the street and slipped into the ER as just another face in the crowd. No cameras. No accolades. Just Emily, silent, unseen. Inside, the chaos hadn't changed. The intercom crackled with urgent pages. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. A toddler screamed in one corner. A teenager with a sprained wrist clutched his mother's arm in another. Staff moved with practiced speed, their eyes tired, their backs hunched from hours of standing. She stood off to the side, trying not to be noticed, her heart thudding strangely in her chest. Then, she saw her. A young nurse, barely in her 20s, clearly new. Was fumbling within 4 lines while simultaneously trying to calm a panicked father. Her voice trembled with every word, and sweat beaded along her forehead. No one was helping her. Everyone was too busy. Emily moved instinctively. She stepped forward and whispered gently, "Slow down. Breathe. Lift the port here." The nurse turned, startled, and for a split second, looked as if she might ask who Emily was. But Emily simply smiled and held the force steady, helping her lock it in place. The nurse nodded gratefully, hands still shaking, and turned back to her patient. Emily stepped away without another word. She slipped out of the hospital quietly, like a shadow, before anyone could recognize her. Her heart ached, but not with sadness this time, with understanding. She had been that nurse once. Overwhelmed, alone, trying not to drown in duty. Back home, the memory wouldn't leave her. That struggling nurse, the exhaustion, the fear, and the realization that not everyone had a voice loud enough to be heard. So Emily decided to give others what she never had. The next morning, she met with her attorney and her financial advisor. She began setting up a quiet scholarship fund under a different name, untraceable to the press, but structured for maximum reach. The grant would support underprivileged nursing students, those from low-income families, those who had the heart but not the means. She didn't make an announcement. There were no press conferences or interviews. Instead, she quietly reviewed applications from young dreamers. She read their essays, their fears, their hopes. She saw herself in every line. And one by one, she began sending out letters. Some were handwritten, others typed, but they all carried the same message. The world needs nurses like you. Don't stop. Keep going. You are seen. The whispers continued. The envy remained. But Emily no longer cared. Let them talk. Let them question. She had traded applause for purpose. Fame hadn't changed her, it had simply pointed her back to who she had always been. And now, she was building something bigger than herself. Something permanent. Something quiet. But powerful. Just like her. Months had passed since that life-altering night in the ER. Since the doors of the hospital slammed open. Since Emily Reed acted on instinct and saved a man's life, unaware he was the son of the President of the United States. So much had changed. And yet, this morning, as she stood beneath the iconic white columns of the executive residence, dressed in her official uniform with the White House medical insignia stitched neatly above her heart, Emily felt the same breathless anticipation she once did before a night shift. The South Lawn had been transformed for a special ceremony. Rows of white chairs lined in perfect symmetry, flags rippling in the soft breeze, and a stage framed with patriotic bunting. It wasn't an award event. Not this time. This time, it was about others. About giving. Emily stood off to the side of the stage, clipboard in hand, reviewing the names of the new recruits, young healthcare professionals chosen to be part of a prestigious mentorship initiative launched by the administration. An initiative she had helped design. The idea had been hers. A way to ensure that new nurses, medics, and trauma specialists had more than just textbook knowledge. They had real-world mentorship from someone who'd lived it, fought it, felt the weight of it. She glanced at the rows of recruits, seated eagerly in pressed uniforms, some clutching notebooks, others just trying to absorb the moment. She saw herself in them, in their upright posture, their hopeful eyes, their trembling hands hidden in pockets. A murmur spread through the audience. A figure approached from the far end of the lawn, drawing attention as he walked steadily toward the stage. It was him, Lance Corporal Leon Jackson, the Marine whose life had changed hers. He was in full dress blues, every button shining, his posture straight and proud. His face was no longer pale and hollow. His steps no longer staggered. He was whole, rebuilt, alive. Emily froze. She hadn't expected him. As he neared the stage, the announcer called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by Lance Corporal Leon Jackson of the United States Marine Corps." The audience rose to its feet in applause. Leon ascended the stage, but he didn't go to the podium right away. He turned to her, and in front of the entire crowd, under the morning sun and the watchful eyes of the nation, he raised his hand in salute. Emily's heart stopped. For a moment, the world went silent. The salute wasn't for a superior officer. It wasn't ceremonial. It was personal. She stepped forward, unsure of whether to return the gesture, but he broke the stillness first. "I asked to speak today," Leon said, turning to the microphone, "because there's something I've needed to say for a long time." He looked out over the crowd, then back at Emily. "When I woke up in that hospital room, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what had happened. All I knew was that I shouldn't have been alive. I learned later that most of my unit had died. I should have been one of them." He paused. The crowd listened, riveted. "But I wasn't. Because of one person." His eyes locked onto hers again. "You didn't just save me, Emily. You changed everything. My life, my family's life, and yours too. You stood up when everyone else hesitated. You acted when others froze. And what's more, when the system punished you, you didn't grow bitter. You rose higher." Emily's throat tightened. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "Every time I wear this uniform, every time I walk, speak, breathe, I remember that it's because of you. And I hope these recruits," he turned to them now, gesturing with his hand, "know that the person you're learning from didn't just serve her patients. She fought for them." A standing ovation followed. Even members of the press stood, clapping as Emily, stunned and humbled, stepped onto the stage beside him. Leon extended his hand. She took it. The applause roared. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from sadness, not even from gratitude, but from something deeper. A sense of wholeness she had never felt before. After the crowd settled and the official photos were taken, the ceremony continued. Emily addressed the recruits with clarity and warmth. She spoke not as a celebrity or a figurehead, but as someone who had once been exactly where they were, uncertain, overwhelmed, and quietly determined to do good. "You'll be challenged," she told them. "You'll be exhausted, and you'll question yourselves more than once. But if you hold on to your purpose, you'll never be lost." The day rolled into a luncheon. Speeches gave way to laughter, and the mood turned light. But Emily's heart carried the gravity of what had just transpired. Later that afternoon, as the crowds dispersed and the sun began to dip behind the tall oaks surrounding the White House, Emily stood alone in the Hall of Portraits. Her footsteps echoed quietly against the polished floor as she walked past the painted faces of presidents who had shaped history. She reached the medical wing, the White House clinic. She paused at the threshold. Months ago, she had entered this place as a guest, dazed and disoriented, uncertain of why she had been summoned. Back then, she had walked these halls with doubt whispering at her heels. But not today. Today, she walked with purpose. Today, she walked in as its leader. She stepped inside, her coat hanging lightly on her shoulders, her badge gleaming under the hallway lights. Nurses greeted her with smiles. Staff nodded respectfully. She passed the room she had recently upgraded with advanced trauma gear and turned the corner into her office. On her desk sat the dog tag. L. Jackson, U.S. Marine. It remained untouched since the day she placed it there. She had offered it back once. Leon insisted she keep it. A reminder, he'd said, of how far we've both come. Emily sat down, took a breath, and smiled, truly, deeply. What had started with a dismissal had turned into honor. What had begun in loss had ended in purpose. She had come full circle. And this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story of courage, compassion, and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful narratives like this. We'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Emily Reed's journey? From being fired after saving a Marine's life to receiving the Medal of Honor, a new home, and becoming head nurse of the White House Medical Clinic, her story is one of resilience, purpose, and quiet strength. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below and rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10. Your feedback helps us create even better content.